And we're live on YouTube. Thanks everyone for joining us again at another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is September 15th, 2021. We will be following along in the agenda that was created in NPM RFC issue number 457. I've shared the meeting notes doc here in chat, but I'll share it again. Feel free to add yourselves as attendees or to the attendees list in that HackMD doc. And I'll be taking notes as we go along here. Quick reminder, as always, that these calls and all comms on the RFC's repo are covered under a code of conduct, and would like to ensure that folks stay mindful and thoughtful as they're speaking and listening. And please raise your hand if somebody else is speaking, and I'll call upon you, and we'll hopefully have good discourse throughout these conversations. And just wanted to give some space and let folks potentially share any announcements that they may have. If there's no announcements, we can just dive into the agenda, which is rather small today. The first of which is issue number 454. This was a poll that I started. I'll share the reference to it, for alternative names for the reification proposal by Vincent Bailey, who's on the call here. Had a conversation with him, I think late last week or earlier this week, just to clarify, what the intent of the reification strategy is, and maybe better names that we could choose to name this. There seems to be a half decent number of folks that actually voted, and so far it seems like the winner of at least the poll is isolated in terms of the name. I saw, Isaac, also you were one of the few people to actually comment on this, and we had talked about it a bit. Did you want to maybe share why you chose this?
Yeah, so the main reason is just, I think that the term isolated sort of describes the effect that's visible to a user who's using that feature, which I think was kind of the goal of calling it pure mode to begin with. Whereas if we call it unhoisted or symlinked or PNPM style, it's sort of is very tied to the implementation. And we may, once Node supports import maps, like it may not require symlinks, and then we have like a -- symlink mode, which is not actually using symlinks, and that's kind of the situation I want to avoid.
So how do folks feel about us changing this, Vincent? I know it's your RFC. Would you be okay with potentially updating it to be renamed to isolated mode?
Yes.
Okay.
Plain and simple. Yes. Okay.
Nice and easy.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. I think then we can probably close the poll in that issue, and I'll take the onus to close that out. I'll just take a note here. And then if you can, update the relevant pieces of the RFC would be great, Vincent. Awesome. So following along on that thread, we have the actual reification mode PR that's open. So this is 436. And Vincent, I'm not sure if you can share maybe a little bit about the changes or updates that you've made based on the comments that have come in. But I don't know if there's been any action or any new comments. I see a couple of new pieces of feedback, I guess, from Jordan within the last hour or so, but maybe you could speak to a little bit about any updates you've made.
Yeah, so I'll share the update since 2 weeks ago, since last meeting, and then we'll discuss some of the unresolved discussions that are still open. So what I've made based on the discussions, both on the RFC and on the call, was I kind of reformulated the motivation and to kind of hopefully be less confusing about using the word sharing and the word deduplicating in some ways that were confusing before. So I also clarify that this mode will be available for everyone, even if people don't use workspaces. So there is that reword. We discussed 2 weeks ago that actually the log file format or the log file itself will not change. It will be exactly the same log file, regardless which mode you use, which is good for compatibility because it means you can have you have 2 different way to install the same repo without changing any file in that repo. So that means your repo is compatible with older version of npm. Simply like maybe you may have some changes that build locally and fail on CI, but you will be able to develop locally, and that also allow to like locally and on CI to have a strict environment or isolated environment. But when you develop to prod, if your prod environment doesn't support Symlink, then you can use hosted mode in prod. Like I know Amazon doesn't at the moment support Symlink, so you could develop all in isolated mode and deploy in hosted, and you have the kind of the guarantee that if it works in isolated, it will work in hosted as well. So I updated this in the RFC, and concerning the what was the last bullet? Yeah, so concerning the compatibility with the ecosystem, I think there is still an open question here, and that's one of the unresolved discussions. So we'll talk about it then. And then I forgot the 2 other things.
Did you have 2 other updates?
Yeah, but no, they just slipped.
So okay if we jump to Jordan?
Oh yeah, the other update is like the configuration. I was wondering whether we should how to configure that mode, whether it should be like per workspace, or should be in the config files, or it should be in the CLI option, or whether we should force that option for a repo or let the developer choose which strategy. So I think it will not be enforced. So repos will be compatible. The repos that will be compatible with isolated will also be compatible with hosted. So there's nothing forcing people to isolate it in order to be able to build and run the repo. So therefore, maybe it will be in the npm RC file as like a preferred mode for this repo, but it could be overwritten by the CLI option either way. So that makes the config.
It goes in the stack of configs.
Yeah.
So Jordan, I see you have your hand up. Vincent, sorry, just to clarify, that last note was that you're saying how you can opt into this is through npm RC config or bypassing like this config option, but you're trying to, I guess, clarify that there should be interoperability between these two modes, right? And that it should still be able to install a project that would have been built, I say built, but reified with isolated mode, or what we're calling isolated mode, but also be able to do it with the default strategy that we have today, which is, let's say, a hoisted mode. There should be. Okay.
And that makes the configuration easier because we don't need to enforce strictly the reification strategy on other developers in the same repo. And the last update I had was we discussed whether we would use junction or symlinks. The constraint of symlinks is like you have to either be an administrator in an elevated prompt, or you need to enable some feature flag on your OS to be able to use symlinks on Windows. I propose we will just use junctions because there is no major issues with junctions. So we could use junctions for now, and if there is a need coming to use symlinks instead, we can always add this as an opt-in later on. So that was the updates I had since 2 weeks ago, and I think we could go back to the 3 unresolved discussions, and they are all involving Jordan. So I think we can let him speak to them.
Sorry, kinda. Okay, so I have like a broader philosophical concern that has some concrete things I'll get to in a second. Isolated mode, or whatever you want to call it, imposing that constraint on yourself, on your own code, is completely reasonable. That's already what most people, what even I do with linter plug, like with ESLint plugin import and so on. You can't require or import anything in first-party code in repos I maintain that isn't listed in package.json, and I think that's a good practice. The fact that it's a good practice, though, does not mean that it should be like forced on third-party code. In other words, it's great that people can switch back and forth between the reification styles, but if I'm working at a company, the infra team set up the npm RC to do isolated mode, and I'm a regular engineer, and I'm not thinking about that. I don't know it even exists. It just quietly does that for me. And all of a sudden, I get some warning because a third-party package isn't, matching this philosophy, and that's not actionable for me. So what I'm going to do is go file an issue and create noise and effort and lead to burnout for a maintainer somewhere in the ecosystem, or it's going to essentially disadvantage that package because I'm just going to quietly go use a different one. I don't think either of those is appropriate. And so, as Isaac asked in chat, yes, I want isolated for me, but not for you. I think we shouldn't be warning people about things that aren't actionable for them. So that's the broader philosophical concern. And then the concrete reasons that this comes into play, ESLint itself, which could be in the graph and not globally installed, requires things that aren't listed in ESLint's package.json constantly. That is how plugins work. Babel does the same with plugins and presets. Literally every tool that takes configuration from the user's project, but in order to do plugins, will do requires of things that aren't in its own package.json. If isolated mode doesn't interfere with this, then great, but then how isolated is it for third-party code? So that's where I'm unclear. There have been bugs filed on ESLint plugin import about this, and I think they're fixed, but I don't really know because it's the people reporting it aren't providing clear repros, and I don't use PNPM or Yarn PNP, and so and I don't have a repo set up to use it, so I don't know how to fix it or even debug it. And really, like so I think that's some of the concrete examples. Is essentially anything with a plugin system is likely to be requiring things that aren't in its package.json. So I think that if we were able to restrict it to just first-party code, then we'd be able to match the ethos in a way that is solely actionable by the user. Right, and then as Isaac pointed out, if we even if we allow it to be opt-in, but it covers the whole graph, then you've just kind of created a privileged class of packages or an unprivileged class of packages that, and I think that it's not a, there's not a universal thing with consensus here that there is a moral issue and that those packages are bad and shameful and like those should be discouraged. And lacking that consensus, I think it's inappropriate for NPM to be artificially screwing over those packages.
Okay. I think just I'll start just by maybe like giving my my own 2 cents on like the fact that this is opt-in. Ideally, we're not changing the default behavior of NPM, so hopefully we're not making a very strong opinion about like which mode you should be using. I definitely feel and share your concerns about like creating a situation for end users that don't have anything actionable that they can do about a warning or about an error that they receive. That is definitely a really good highlight and good call out, Jordan. But yeah, like I think that the way that we're presenting this is sort of an opt-in, and there are many classes of there's many types of packages in the ecosystem today that are being left out of or not available to certain consumers just based on they're can't be built on certain systems. They are reliant on certain I think there's a whole new a lot of nuance in that kind of like
there is, and I'm not saying NPM has a duty to include every possible thing people can come up with. I'm saying that the things that work and that have worked in the ecosystem for decades should continue to like work unless they are somehow like morally bad. And I think that it being opt-in does not wipe away that problem. It definitely is. It like obviously for like it's way less of a problem than if it were to become the default, right? That would be a completely different tone of discussion. But even opt-in, people are going to try it for fun and then complain to maintainers or change their dependencies. People are going to use it without knowing because someone more experienced on the repo is going to put it in npm-rc and commit it. And then the same effect happens. And people are going to want to use it because it's new and shiny and they think it's better and they might be wrong about why they think it's better, but they think it's better, so they're going to use it, right? So like I think opt-in is not sufficient to be like, therefore it's fine.
Go ahead, Isaac. I see your hands up.
Yeah. So this whole question about like disadvantaging packages or whatever, I think it's given the relative popularity of yarn PNPM or yarn PNP and of PNPM, I think it's more likely that it's going to disadvantage this feature rather than disadvantage individual packages. What people are going to find is they'll try it. It won't work because they have ESLint and a plugin, and then they're going to go, oh, I guess isolated mode is broken. I'm not going to use it. And that's also a bad outcome. Like I'm not saying that makes it fine. I'm saying that is totally worth bringing up as a concern. I'm less concerned about features about disadvantaging packages than I am about spending all this time and effort to build a feature that has some benefits, but most of our users can't use it for this reason. Like that seems to me like totally a valid thing to work around. I'm just kind of bringing this back to practicality. I think from a CLI design point of view, like, yeah, you're probably right. Some way to say, look, I want to isolate my code. I want to make sure that I'm not the one making the mistake, having the shadow dependencies, but also I want everything in my tree to work. PNPM actually has a mode like this for exactly that reason, because otherwise they couldn't get people to use PNPM, right? So it's totally worth doing. And I think it's something that's going to be, if we don't build that on day 1, it's going to be probably the first thing that anybody using this feature wants. there is also some value, especially in the kinds of use cases that led to this, where Vincent was coming from, where you have a giant monolithic project, and actually you want to make sure that you're not using any dependencies that have shadow depths. This is already something that's in process, and nobody is. It's not keeping ESLint from being used, right? Like that's getting on just fine.
Sure.
And so I think
that's because of the flaws we've already discussed about all workspace implementations currently, which hoist everything to the top. That's because everything is already getting these shadow dependencies, and that's what makes it work.
Right.
Like the strictness breaks things, but most people aren't running through the strictness right now. And when they are, they're running into problems. And PNP has already, like, PNP asked, like, Mael asked me to make changes in Resolve solely so that PNP could runtime hack them in to work around these problems. And I assume Mael asked many packages in the ecosystem for similar workarounds. And I assume that PNPM is probably doing similar things to try and hide the fact that things are broken so much from their own users. And I'm not trying to make a value judgment on that. I'm just saying, like, that it's possible that we're underestimating the actual breakage because of these kinds of cover-ups, essentially.
Yeah, so I think my point is, I think there's value in a super strict all the way down mode. We have that for peer depths, for example. You can't use almost any package in any ecosystem. Like if you use something that uses React and you have strict peer depths enabled, I can almost guarantee that it's past like a trivial level of complexity, it's going to break. And that's why we don't have that on by default. But it's valuable if you know that there shouldn't be any conflicts, or if you really want to surface those conflicts, to be able to kind of run in that mode and see what breaks. And I think that there's some value in a super strict isolated mode where everything is isolated all the way down the tree, even though there's a large number of projects where that will never work for them. There's higher value in an isolated mode, which isolates your dependencies kind of from each other. But if they're using shadow depths of their dependencies kind of past that first level in the dependency graph, then that's totally fine. And then this comes, assuming in the fullness of time, we want to do both modes, right? We want like, isolated equals strict and isolated equals just me. That kind of brings up the question of how we go about implementing it. So I think having this RFC to kind of define what is the strict isolated mode, totally fine. We can implement that and then see how to tweak it in order to enable shadow depths within transitive dependencies, or we can build that into the design from the start. I don't really have any strong opinions about that. And we can also ship them separately, right? We can ship the super strict mode.
That's where I was going to bring up. I don't have any opinions about the order of implementation or design. I think though that anything that, like, this comes up in Node occasionally, anything that has ecosystem level impacts, that where things will ripple out to maintainers, I think we have to be very careful about releasing it. And if we release the full tree isolated mode and do not include the just me isolated mode, then what I worry is that people will rush to try the full tree one, and the zeitgeist will not learn about the nice middle ground of just isolate my own stuff, and it will end up harming maintainers. That's what I'm concerned about here. So I would prefer to ship either just the myself mode or both, and not to just ship the full tree mode. And this, of course, is all assuming it's plausible to implement it, which I have no idea.
So I think the tough part is definitely changing, like, inside the ecosystem, getting a lot of folks to adopt this over, like, that takes a long period of time. If we're talking about, like, that what you're talking to, Jordan, which is a hypothetical field that exists in the package JSON. I think that takes a lot more time versus like what folks would like to see today, which is locking this down and sort of opting into this mode and then cleaning up their projects or starting net new projects with this mode in mind. I would love, Jonathan, I know you just joined, but you've been putting some good comments, I think, in the chat. Did you want to at least speak to and also introduce yourself maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Apologize about that.
So I'm Jonathan Creamer. I work with Vincent at Microsoft. And I'm helping implement Midgard Yarn Strict in the big monorepo. We've got about 1,000 packages in there. So I've been, I took actually some of the Midgard Yarn Strict work from his repos and put it in directly in our monorepo so we can iterate it really quickly. So I've been experimenting with it a lot. Yeah, I was just going to say, to me, like, it just seems like you always should declare your stuff in a package JSON. I don't know why that would be like a jarring change for a package owner. I've actually identified at least 3 different GitHub repos, including some of our own Microsoft ones, where we forgot to declare something in the package JSON. And it broke when I ran Midgard Yarn Strict, because like Midgard Yarn Strict will, not work if you forgot to declare something. And so I've actually been able to submit PRs or help 3 different package owners by, making sure that they have this stuff declared. I'm trying to understand the ESLint and Babel plugin example. From my understanding, like, yeah, those will be required automatically, but if they're not declared in some package JSON somewhere, that thing will break. You have to have them declared somewhere.
They're declared at the root, but not within the thing that's requiring them. So I tell ESLint, I give ESLint a string, and I say, this is my plugin. And then at some point later, ESLint requires that string and expects it to be in the tree. So it's a top level dependency, but it's not an ESLint dependency. If ESLint is isolated from those and can't require other kind of peers within the depth graph, then it's not going to work.
Well, let me clarify, Jonathan, because I think
with the caveat that it will manage to resolve your project or your repo top level dependencies.
Right, yeah.
So these are like global for your repo. So everything you have at the top level will be requirable by any packages installed in your repo.
So if you're having this problem, you could install your ESLint and Babel plugins and dev dependencies at the root of your repo, and then that would still work, I think.
Okay, so I have 3 responses to that. That's interesting. So first, Jonathan, I was saying detecting bugs in packages is something that sounds great, and that maintainers will of course want to just fix. Like, oops, I forgot. No big deal. That's not something I'm concerned with. I'm concerned about not having workarounds for the valid use cases. Now, if a dependency can require anything that's in the top level, isn't that going to prevent discovery of those exact same bugs? If I depend on Lodash, then I could depend on 1,000 things that forgot to depend on it, but require it, and it'll just work. So how is this actually isolated?
Vincent, do you have kind of a thought on where your head would be on that?
Yeah, so putting things at the top of the repo will be like a workaround to not be blocked and to don't be able to still use the framework you love and write the config files you like to write them without being blocked on this. But
that sounds very nice and practical, but it seems to me like it defeats the philosophical purpose of the mode.
We're discussing all or nothing. We're like when you put one dependency in your root, you're declaring that this dependency is global, is accessible by everyone. But all the others are isolated. You're not excluding all the strictness you can get just because one package doesn't work with it. So I guess that's the difference between hoisting everything or just manually deciding to kind of hoist, because that's essentially what you're doing. When you take a dependency to a package in the root, you're basically forcing the hoisting of it.
Yeah. So if you put it in the root, you're like intentionally saying, I realize what I'm doing right now, versus it accidentally happening. Like you're saying, it's okay. I'm aware that this is going in the top level. I put it there intentionally on purpose because I actually want this thing to be able to be shared across, which is different than like putting it in some other package and having it accidentally hoisting and you not realizing that it got hoisted.
So what this means is if I get an issue on my package saying I tried isolated mode and some shit broke and it points at you, like I can either fix it by adding it to my package JSON, of course, but if there's valid reasons why I shouldn't, my response should be put it in the root of your package, deps or dev deps as appropriate, and your problems are over.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And is that also the same workaround that PNP, like, does that work for PNPM as well?
Yeah, so PNPM has 2 workarounds, or 3 actually. So there are documented. This is the number 1 workaround. The second one is through a config file, you can actually declare dependency on behalf of external packages. We discussed whether we want
like
to have
override
this.
it. Okay.
Yeah, you can say, well, I want my Babel package to be able to have access to, I don't know, whatever plugin. So you can do that through a config file. And we discussed to implement this in NPM with isolating mode, and we decided to not implement it at the first iteration. Maybe later, if the first workaround is not enough, or based on the feedback. And then the third workaround is like a programmatical API to add some hooks, and that's I don't know too much about that one.
Right. And then pardon my ignorance here, does PNPM have similar workarounds, or PNP, excuse me, have similar workarounds, or is?
Yeah, so PNP has a list of known breaking packages and a list of how they are fixed. So they are like automatically fixed. This one that
Like
are well known.
hard-coded into Yarn itself, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you install a dependency that is not fixed by the maintainer, they're automatically Yarn will by default add that missing dependency. So there's that too.
All right. Well, I mean, I appreciate knowing this. This, I think, mitigates a number of my concerns, right? Given that that as a maintainer, my easy answer is either I'll add it or you add it. That calms me down a lot about this. So thank you for explaining that. It still kind of feels like it defeats the philosophical goal, because things aren't actually isolated. They're only isolated from other siblings, right? But they can still hijack whatever they need from the application. And in a sufficiently large application, that is a large list of undeclared dependencies it could get at.
Yeah.
But,
I think that's the big use case we're solving for, is that case where like there's thousands of potential packages in a single place. And this problem gets really, really bad when you don't have this solution.
One thing is in the root, typically in big repos, you don't have too much dependency on the root level. Like the dependency are in your packages, in your workspaces. In the root, you may have
Bazel projects would disagree with you. They have one package JSON in the root by default, which in large applications has thousands of dependencies listed.
Okay, well then, yes, in this context, it beats the purpose. In other contexts, you will have just prettier a few of these dependencies that needs to be in the root to be run by your Git hooks or a Husky or this kind of things. But like typically Babel will not need to be in the root, so you will have it in the root only if you want to declare it globally.
So Isaac, I see his hands up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, this feature is not fundamentally workspace related, right? It's a reification strategy which will be used whether you're using workspaces or not. But it does get much more powerful in a workspace project, because then you're like the bulk of your project is in dependencies, right? Because that's what a workspace is. It's linked as like a file dependency. And so the isolation of each workspace starts to become really important. And in a large project where most of what you're using are workspaces, and you have a lot of workspaces, and they interdepend on one another to a high degree, then it will actually prevent an awful lot of bugs from getting out. And for the cases where you have just like a handful of dev tools that need to do plugins and fancy stuff, like that goes in the root and it's fine. But yeah, I think there is definitely a class of large apps which are a single package, effectively a single package JSON, not using workspaces or only using workspaces for kind of small isolated parts of the application. And that is a little bit, yeah, it becomes a less powerful feature, right? The more stuff you put in the global, then the less value there is to isolation. But I mean, there's not much we can do about that.
We can rename it. So, like I said, I jokingly said we can go back to the poll if this would help also like mitigate confusion if we have already identified the fact that it's like it's not 100% isolated and like we could potentially again consider a different name. But
so just to reiterate, just to make sure, the workaround here would be to put it in a child workspaces package JSON, so that child workspace, like then that becomes global to the child workspace, but not to the siblings. Whereas if I were to put it in the root of the workspace, then it would become available to every child workspace and all of their dependencies. So there's like two tiers of potential global pools, whereas without workspaces, there's just the one. Is that right?
No. Within a workspace, its dependencies are isolated from each other and from all the other workspaces.
Okay. But if I have a child workspace that depends on something that omits a declaration, and I want to use the workaround to declare it in my own project, I add it to my child workspaces package JSON.
I think that's right. I think that what you're saying is right, John. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm fairly certain what you're saying is correct.
If you wanted to resolve that in every single child, like say you have ESLint and you have a single plugin that you want in all of them, can you put that in the root workspace? The root package JSON rather than the child package JSON?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. That's great then. Yeah. Cool.
So how does in this reification strategy, workspaces are still symlinked directly into the root node modules or no?
What does it mean?
So I have a workspace at like packages/foo that I declare as a workspace.
Yeah.
How is that, like, what do we do with that? Is that linked in the root node modules folder or no?
We can decide. Okay. In my mind, that only the workspaces that are listed as dependency of the root will be linked, but Yarn is automatically linking all the workspaces to the root. You mean like in the root, there will be a symlink in the non-module folder to every workspaces. Is this what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, we can decide. I don't have a strong opinion there.
I think as of right now, they're linked from the node modules directories to each other. There's no like in the current Yarn workspaces implementation and npm workspaces, there's like a node module /at scope or whatever that has all of them in one place, and they get symlinked to each other. And I think in the ideal state, not to like a global root prop thing. I think that's what you're asking, Isaac.
Right. So right now, effectively, when you have a workspace declared, when we load that in the Arborist data structure, we only have one edge out representing a dependency. If it's a workspace, that's an edge of type equals workspace. And that workspace edge will clobber any dev dep or other kind of dep. So we're going to have to definitely, that could lead us into some knots to comb through in that data structure.
Tierney, I see your hands up.
So the inverse of the question I had earlier, if I have a dependency in my root and I want to solve it separately for two different child workspaces, can I do that? Will that be like, if okay, so say like ESLint, I have a plugin. Well, no, say like I'm requiring TypeScript, and TypeScript missed a module in their package JSON. I want to require two versions ago and one version ago in two different workspaces. Is that something that I can do as well? So like in the child, can I resolve it by installing it in the child package JSON, despite the thing it's being the thing that the child is getting it from is the global rather than itself?
So yeah, you can do this, but it won't be a workaround for the configuration issue where you have a string in your config file. There is only one global scope. So you cannot have a second level global scope, which is at your workspace level. But
well,
you can have multiple versions, of course.
Yeah.
But you what depends on this second level has to be strict. You cannot use in your config, you use require resolve, and then you can use these dependencies, but it won't work if you just use the name of the module or package.
Okay.
So hold on. If you have if I have ESLint and an ESLint plugin defined in the dependencies of a workspace, then that ESLint plugin will be linked to the workspace's node modules folder. Will ESLint be able to access it? I don't think it will, right? Because it's not
Not with the current
with the current approach.
proposal, no.
Right, because everything actually lives somewhere inside the root node modules folder.
For folks who haven't seen it, I showed the rendered RFC, and I think there's some examples of the current strategy that and how things would lay out on disk that Vincent put together. It sounds like maybe we could add more examples for some of these other use cases. Is that what I'm hearing? That
I'm fine with that. I also don't need it.
Okay. In terms of Jordan, like because you started this off one way, and I feel like we've massaged the conversation a little bit. And the hope is that we're going to start to potentially work on this feature very soon.
My preference would be that while this feature is built, it is the possibility of now or later building a only first party isolation mode version of it, like the just for me, not for you kind of thing, is like kept in the minds of those building it. And maybe we could ship both of them at the same time. And if not, then it maybe, the code base won't be boxed into a corner when next month someone comes along to try and build the more encapsulated form. I think the workaround is good and simple and addresses many of my concerns. I still expect to get a bunch of noisy issues, but now I have a quick one-liner that I can use to respond to them, which is a big part of the battle of getting all those issues, is knowing what to say without pissing people off. So I think my urgency is addressed. I think I would just be much happier if both of those modes switched, because then my response would be like, either use this workaround or stop trying to, stop caring about things that aren't your own code. Just like when someone tries to lint node modules, I tell them, don't do that. That's not yours, right? I would prefer to tell them the same thing here. But go ahead.
I think we really need to get a little bit of play testing to sort out a lot of that stuff. We're doing a lot of like hypothesizing, and that's good. That's like what this call is for. But also, I think we're sort of at the limits of like what we can confidently say about the pros and cons of this, right? Like we have Microsoft has a use case that is going to benefit from it, from performance as well as a correctness point of view. That's, for me, that's enough to just do it. And then let's see how it goes. I wouldn't be surprised if you're 100% right and it causes a bunch of noisy issues, but we do have some easy workarounds at least. We can mark it as experimental. We can call it out in the, docs about it, that it's like, hey, this is a new thing that we're trying out, sure. Like it's in beta, whatever. Could even log a warning, all, like this is an experimental mode.
That's all fine, but NPM is Microsoft, so like I would hope that myself think, my own entity that has a use case, therefore we're just going to do it, is not the sole motivation for doing things. But obviously I'm not ascribing bad faith, and in this case I think it's fine.
No, I think it is. I think it is representative of the challenges that we've heard about from other folks using cool. large projects with a lot of duplication and a lot of shadow devs. I mean, that's really the ideal use case for PNP.
Sure.
M.
I was gonna say I just joined Microsoft in February, and boy, do I wish I would have had something like what we're working on at Eventbrite, where I just came from.
I'm not claiming it's only Microsoft. I'm just saying that the motivation should be others also have the problem, not the employer of most of the people on this call have the problem.
No, this is a problem that would have been really nice to have been solved in our mono repo at Eventbrite.
Yeah, I think to that point, Jordan, like what we're trying to do with this form before even that acquisition was to pull in the best ideas from the ecosystem, from what tools we're seeing in the community, bring them back in, and then also discuss how they're going to be built, right? Like that's why this is an open call. And
not trying to imply bad faith in any way, just thought I would call that out. This is recorded and streamed, so.
Yeah, we're on YouTube, live on YouTube for folks folks that are watching. You can join us every Wednesday. Cool. I'm hoping then that we can potentially make the few small changes, ideally just to the name. Are we okay with the name now, based on like the discussion we've just had? Yeah, still okay with calling it isolated mode, even though it's not 100% isolated. You can.
Did I miss anybody bringing up strict mode as a?
I was a big fan of strict mode at the beginning of this, and there was a poll, but it's not
big note of strict mode.
Okay,
is the same kind of everybody has different associations. I think
Node and JavaScript each have their own different strict modes also. So
I think stamping on use strict is not like just for searchability, not something we should do.
Yeah,
fair enough. We'll have to change some internal pipelines too. Isolated. Got it.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Cool. So Vincent, can I give you the action to update the RC, and then I think we can potentially ratify this at least and get a POC together, or start working on the actual code. Sound good?
Yep.
Actions. Actually, we've already got that as action. Okay. Then moving on, I want to bring up the issue that we brought up last week, just again about NPM 8 and the fact that we are moving quickly here to potentially cut a next major version of NPM, potentially as soon as within a week or so. The major breaking changes are outlined in the RFC that was made by Nilf, who unfortunately wasn't able to jump on the call today. I know that Gar, maybe you can speak to the fact that we did land the one feature in release next, and it's going to go out, I think, in our next release tomorrow. Did you want to say anything more on that feature?
It's actually already live. There's a bug fix for it going out tomorrow. But right now, if you have the latest NPM or you're using the install.sh, which will pull the latest of that semver, if it notices the engines is not correct, it will refuse to install something called NPM globally. It'll do a strict engines check on its own. And yes, Jordan, I've actually got a branch I'm ready to push. I just didn't know how public we wanted. I can start the PR. The changes will be don't test in Node 10 anymore, change engines to be greater or equal to 12, and change main in the package JSON to a file that throws an error saying we don't have a programmatic API. So functionally, the only difference is for people like us who go node dot to test the CLI, we're going to have to go node.bin npm CLI.js now.
That's great. The programmatic API hasn't followed semver since like NPM 3. I learned it the hard way. As far as the engines thing, do you want to start at 12.0, or maybe it could be hoisted to 12.ESM or 12 point latest, just to save yourselves problems later when you want to use new features?
I would probably say, well, it depends on our dependency, or not our, I'm not, but the NPM's dependencies, right? It depends on whatever they support. And I think one of the big things was there's something that, yeah, there's something that it dropped it. Yeah. Anyway, I'll let y'all.
Yeah, so we were going to open up, and I have the action to actually open up an issue on the Node projects repo, just to inform them that we're planning on making this change, and also to ensure that we can fall within the current major release line. And so we could probably flush out what the right version would be of 12 then to support.
Yeah, I mean, for 12, like there's the version that entered LTS, and I don't remember which exactly that is. And then there's also the version that added ESM support, and I don't remember which one that is. And either of those is probably a useful point to hop to.
Well, we're not going to be doing ESM, and I think when it entered LTS is the right call here. So I'll make that PR. I'll push that branch here after this call and make the PR, and we can dog food that Node version. I don't care.
I believe ESM was before LTS, so that would be included in LTS.
That'd be great. The other thing is NPM's. Oh, no, never mind. You have exports, so you're good there. Cool. Thanks.
You did that.
Yes, I didn't remember if I had or not.
It's always good when your past self helps your current self. Isaac, I see your hand still up. Did you have something you want to add for this?
No, I just forgot to put my hand down. Sorry.
No worries. Okay, so I've taken the or added an action here. Gar, is it okay to get you to potentially determine what that version is that we'd like to?
Oh, sure. And I will change that exports entry, Jordan. Thanks for calling that out.
Okay, so we should, in very short order, potentially be cutting the next major, not with many features, but ideally the supportability long-term has gone up. So two last items that we had on the agenda that I wanted to bring some level of attention to. The robust lifecycle scripts RFC, which was a draft. I know, Fritzy, you said there was no update, and I think that's a good update. But just wanted to ask you if maybe we should remove the agenda for now and label come
Yeah,
back to it.
let's remove the tag and back burner it. I think there is some utility in addressing this in the future, but probably not the priority right now.
We'll do that just now. Done. And Tierney, the audit assertions, is there any update here or anything we should expect?
I mean, I don't think I have anything action on my end. I think this is, I don't recall if, I believe we're at a kind of a stalemate with it. Not in like a bad way, just like I don't have anything else I can do. I did the things that we talked about. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's in a state where it could be accepted, is my understanding. If people want to look over it again and give feedback and tell me if it's awful or tell me it's great, or tell me it's mediocre, feel free. But I think it's generally in a state where it's pretty good. I think the final thing that there's kind of discussion on is third-party input, and I'm personally pretty against it, and I would actually prefer to close it and not accept it if we do it that way, largely because I don't think it's a good approach presently. But yeah, I've documented my kind of thoughts on that in here, and I think expanding to that later is fine. Doing it as a separate RFC is fine, but yeah, that's the only remaining thing, and I think as I said, I'm kind of, I would very much prefer not to do it if we do it that way. So.
Okay. So I may remove the agenda label, at least for now, if there's nothing actionable, like if we want, like, or keep it on the table and just ask for folks to continue to give it a look and give back feedback.
Yeah, I guess in one of the next meetings, it'd be nice to know what next steps are to either ratify it or close it, either way.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to, it's not dependent on the public registry implementing the endpoint, and we've done that before.
Yeah.
Or we've accepted RFCs that we knew weren't going to be actioned by immediately, at least by our partners. So, okay. We're about a minute over. I appreciate everybody jumping on today, and thank you so much for all the discussion. Hopefully we can keep things going, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.
Thanks, y'all. This is cool.
Thanks. Bye.